Okay, here is our journal page for lesson 7-13 on insect data. So we're going to take all of the data that we measured for these insects and we are going to put it into our table here. And then we're going to use the line plot on the bottom to put in that data that we took. Okay, so let's get started. So a short-tailed dusk darter dragonfly is the first insect that they want us to give us the measurement on. So I'm going to look for that one. And maybe I'll actually do this by the page. So actually, let's do it by the page. Let's start with the ground beetle. The ground beetle was 7/8 of an inch. So let's look over ground beetle and write 7/8 of an inch. And actually, it already says length to the nearest inch, so you don't have to include the unit if you don't want to. Okay, next one is the damselfly, which is 1 2/8 of an inch. So let's find him. 1 2/8. The katydid is 1 6/8. The Indian meal moth is 3/8, and so is the ladybug. So let's find that one. Here's the meal moth is 3/8. And the ladybug is 3/8. Okay. Short-tailed dusk darter dragonfly is 1 6/8. And the southeastern field cricket is 7/8. Okay, so let's go to the next page. The green lacewing is 5/8. So let's find green lacewing. Here it is. The boreal firefly is 3/8 of an inch. So let's find that one. Here it is. The paper wasp is 5/8. The Carolina mandid is 1 6/8. Okay, the green June beetle is 6/8. The yellow bumblebee is also 6/8. American cockroach is 1 4/8. And last one is the red-legged grasshopper, which is an even 1 inch. Okay, so now we have all of our lengths to the nearest 1/8 inch. So now we have to plot the data set on the line plot. Be sure to include a title and a label. So here's where the title goes and here's where the label goes. When you create a line plot, it is super important to include these things so the person that is reading your data set is going to understand what it is. If you just put in numbers, it could be the measurement of anything. So you want to make sure you include a title that is clear. So this is insect lengths, right? Because we measured the lengths of how long these insects were. And down here is going to describe what do these marks mean. Well, they are the length to, actually it's not to the nearest because we measured exactly. Nearest means like estimate. So it's the length in inches. Okay, I'm actually going to switch to my blue pen to write these so I don't get confused with the pink. So our smallest data point is going to be the smallest length of one of these insects. And I know that the boreal fly, the ladybug, and the Indian meal moth are all 3/8 of an inch. And I don't see anything smaller. So my smallest length was 3/8 of an inch. So now, every time you move over to a new tick mark on the line, you are increasing by 1/8 of an inch, even if none of these bugs measure that length. The increments between the marks have to be the same, whether it's a 1/2 inch, 1 inch, a 1/4 inch, or 1/8 of an inch. It has to be the same. This case, we're using 1/8 inch. So that would be 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and instead of writing 8/8, we know that's 1 inch. So then this would be 1 and 1/8, 1 and 2/8, 1 and 3/8, 1 and 4/8, 1 and 5/8, and the last one is going to be 1 and 6/8. So now all of these are spaced 1/8 inch apart. So now we can start plotting on our graph. I like to put check marks or cross out the insect or the value so I don't get confused and plot something more than once. So the short-tailed dusk darter dragonfly is 1 and 6/8 of an inch. So I'm going to put an X here, and I'm going to put a check mark here to show that I already plotted that one. The boreal firefly is 3/8, so I'm going to put an X here and a check. Yellow bumblebee is 6/8, X here, check. Damselfly is 1 and 2/8. The ground beetle is 7/8. The great green lacewing is 5/8. I would not rush this process. The ladybug is 3/8 because you don't want to mess anything up because then it'll mess up all of the questions on the next page. Carolina mandid is 1 and 6/8. The red-legged grasshopper is 1 inch. American cockroach is 1 and 4/8. The green June beetle is 6/8. The paper wasp is 5/8. The Southfield cricket is 7/8. Indian mealmouth is 3/8. And finally, the katydid is 1 and 6/8. Okay, so now we have our line plots. Now we are going to go to the next page, which I have to find. Hold on where I put it. Oh, give me 1 second. I forgot to grab it from my printer. Okay, I am back. Here is the insect data continued. So this is the next page where you're going to be answering some questions. So it says, use the completed line plot on journal page 266 to answer the questions below. What is your favorite insect on the line plot? Again, Miss Mold's favorite insect is definitely going to be different than yours. So you're going to answer this however you would like. So my favorite insect is the ladybug. So I'm going to write in ladybug. I also like the dragonfly, and the ladybug is 3/8 of an inch. What is my least favorite insect? Probably the, let's see, I'm not a huge fan of cockroaches, so maybe the American cockroach, which is 1 and 4/8 of an inch. So the American cockroach, and it's 1 and 4/8 of an inch. So now C is going to be different for Miss Mold's than for yours because I have different favorite insects. What is the combined length of your favorite and least favorite insects? So I'm going to switch to my blue pen to do that math. So combined length means addition. So 1 and 4/8 plus 3/8. So if I did that out and added those together, I would get 1 and 7/8. So they have a combined length of 1 and 7/8 inches. What is the difference in length between those two? So difference means subtraction usually. So if I subtract 1 and 4/8 minus 3/8, I know that the whole number is going to stay the same. And 4/8 minus 3/8 is 1/8. So my answer is, the difference is 1 and 1/8 of an inch. Okay, number 2. How many insects are 1 6/8 inches long? So let's go back to our chart. And here's 1 6/8, and I see 1, 2, 3 X's, so that's 3 insects. How many insects are 7/8 of an inch long? So I'm going to go back again. I'm going to find 7/8, and I see that there's 2 X's, so there's 2 insects that measure that length. What is the difference between these two measurements? Now, they're not talking about how many insects, they're talking about the actual measurement in inches. So if I were to do that, I would do 1 6/8 minus 7/8. So now this numerator is too small. Actually, I'm going to use a sheet of scrap paper so I can make my math a little bit bigger so you guys will be able to see it. So I'm doing 1 6/8 minus 7/8. I'm going to have to trade this 1 for 7/8 and add it to this 6/8 to make an improper fraction, so which I know is 13/8. Now I can subtract the 7/8. And my answer is going to be, oh, actually, I think I made a no, I didn't make a mistake, is 6/8, because 13 minus 7/8 is 6/8. So the difference of these two measurements is 6/8. How many insects are 7/8 inches and are longer than 7/8 inches and shorter than 1 6/8 inches? Okay. So from 7/8 to 1 6/8, how many insects measure in between these two measurements? And I see 1, 2, 3. So there are 3 insects that measure in between 7/8 and 1 6/8 inches. What is their combined length? So now we're going to have to add. So I'm going to get my scrap paper back again. I'm going to just make a line to separate. Okay, the first one is 1 inch plus 1 2/8 plus 1 4/8. So if we separated this into whole numbers and fractions, the whole numbers would be 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus the fractions, which is 2 plus 2/8 plus 4/8. And if I did 4 and 2 is 6, so 6/8 plus 3, you should get 3 6/8. So their combined length is 3 6/8 inches. How many insects are longer than 3/8 of an inch and shorter than 7/8 of an inch? Okay, so let's go back to our chart. It said long, I'm going to use my blue pen this time. Longer than 7/8 of an inch and shorter, longer than 3/8 of an inch and shorter than 7/8. So they're looking at the values in between here. And we have 2 5/8 of an inch and 2 6/8 of an inch. So you were going to come back over here. How many insects are longer than 3/8 of an inch and shorter than 7/8 of an inch? And we figured that out. It's 4. 4 insects. Let me switch back to my pink pen. What is their combined length? So this is where I'm going to get my scrap paper again, so I can make it nice and big for you guys. There are 2 insects that measure 5/8. So I have to make sure I'm adding 2 of those values. And then 2 that measure 6/8 equals unknown value. Well, I know that 5/8 plus 5/8 is 10/8. Plus 6/8 plus 6/8 is 12/8. And if you add across, you get 22/8. And if I convert that to a improper fraction, from an improper fraction to a mixed number, I'm gonna get 2 6/8 as my answer. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna put that down. What is their combined length? It is 2 6/8 of an inch. And you've heard Miss Mole talk about this a bunch of times. My only issue with the workbook pages is they don't give you any room here to do your math. That's why I really recommend using a scrap paper. It's also a great way to recycle materials. So if there's a paper that you colored a picture on, or that you don't want anymore, or that is a little ripped, use it for math scrap paper. Okay, 5. What is the measure of the longest insect? So the measure of the longest insect. And we know that the measure of the longest insect is 1 6/8 of an inch. And how many insects measure that length? 3 of them. What is their combined length? So I'm going to get a new, piece of scrap paper. So if there's 3 of these, it would be 3 times 1 6/8, which we can rewrite as 3 times 1 plus 6/8. This is what we learned this unit. And you multiply your whole numbers, 3 times 1, and add it to the whole number times the fraction. So 3 times 6/8. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 3 times 6/8 is 18/8, which would be 3 18/8. Or if you want to change that, you could put it as 5 2/8 if you changed this to a mixed number. Okay, so let's put that back over here. Their combined length is 5 2/8. What is the measure of the shortest insect? Well, we know that the shortest insect is 3/8. How many insects have that measure? 3. What is their combined length? So we're just going to do the same thing. 3 times 3/8, which would give me 9/8, which if I change that from an improper fraction to a mixed number, I can take out one whole and I'm left with 1/8. So 1 1/8. What is the difference in length between the longest and shortest insects? So if I took the longest insect, which is 1 6/8, and I subtract the smallest insect, which was 3/8, I know I just have to subtract the fractions, and I'm left with 1 3/8. So write and solve your own problem using the data from your line plot. So you could say, my example question is, how many insects measure less than 1 inch? Blank insects. Now I have to solve. And if I see, here's 1 inch. So all of these are less than 1 inch. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I could type in or write in 9 insects. Okay, that is it for your journal pages for today. I'm gonna do the math boxes on my iPad, so it'll be a little bit easier for you guys to see. If you have any questions, leave your teacher a comment on Google Classroom.